is one question that didn't get answered at that conference because of time. We just had to move beyond it. And so I'm tackling it today. So this is the question that didn't get answered at the marriage conference, and I will put videos up eventually from that conference on my channel, probably within the next month and a half. All right. This question was basically, how do I correct my husband as a Christian? Now, this I take to be a good-hearted Christian wife who's asking, how do I navigate this challenge of having, see, Christians have these high moral standards and values, which is very biblical and true, that we should, and yet we're partnered with people who are like us, falling short on a regular basis. The need for husbands and wives to be able to correct each other is actually pretty strong, but the danger of overcorrecting, of correcting too much, of correcting in wrong ways is always present, because my flesh comes out when your flesh comes out, right? Flesh hooks flesh is the phrase that I've heard. So I asked my wife this question because I think that my wife, here we go, my question number one back there. My wife is good at this. I think that she spent time learning and honing her ability to do this, to come to me with correction. She respects me as like the leader in our marriage, and not the only leader in our home, because she's a leader too, but the one who has a higher role of leadership. And so that's her perspective on it. And I think that's biblical. So she says the following things. Here's my wife's advice to wives on this topic. She says, it's easy to correct everything. My wife notices everything. Like I'm not like that. Like I notice everything about certain subjects, but she tends to notice everything about the things I'm not noticing. And so she says it's easy to correct everything, and recommends that people, wives, learn to not try to correct everything. If you do correct everything, it can tend to shut down your husband's ears, because he sees it as nagging, and it may be nagging or it might not be. But the point is that you're correcting so much that the sensitivity to you is not there. I almost think of it like currency. When I'm bringing someone correction, I want to know if in the relationship, if I have the currency, like the credit, the place to say this thing without destroying the relationship. Now, sometimes I'll still correct, even though I know I don't have that currency, because it's what's needed. It's such an important issue. So you should do it anyways. But generally speaking, you want to be thinking like, am I correcting so much that it's not going to be heard? Are they correcting themselves? This is a question my wife suggests you ask. Is your husband correcting himself? Is he like, hey, I understand, that he understands what he did that was not correct, that was wrong, or the thing he said that was incorrect. You're driving back and he's obviously meditating on it, but you feel like you want to vent. Like, I just want to get it off my chest that I didn't like that you did that. That thing would be unwise to do. I mean, this is not going to help your marriage. I try to treat people with respect, which sounds so pretentious to say that, but I mean, it applies to the issue of correction. When you look at someone and you go, I can tell you're correcting yourself, there's no need to correct them. My wife also says another question to ask before you correct is, are you only correcting when you're frustrated? And that's a really important question to ask. This is good for parents as well to ask on a very different issue with raising their kids. Do you only discipline when you're upset? You're doing a bad job if that's the case. Like that's a huge red flag. Like, you don't notice it because you're so used to it, but that's a bad thing. But if you only correct a spouse when you're irritated, when you're frustrated, it's going to come out wrong. And so she says, wait till it passes. Wait till the frustration passes. You may still want to bring correction to that thing, but wait till you're not frustrated. James tells us the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. It tells us to be slow to speak, slow to wrath, and quick to listen. I think that that's the idea, is just slow down. You may still bring godly correction, but that correction may come after having prayed, after having meditated, after having thought through it. And so my wife's advice, as I look at my poor handwriting, is wait till that frustration passes, not because you will not correct at all, but because when you do, you'll have a better tone. You will have prayed over the issue, prayed for your husband and about the issue, and God kind of corrects you as you pray about those things. You'll have wisdom. And my wife says that when she waits to correct me, which she does correct me, when she waits to correct me, it always comes out, quote, so different. And that's just great wisdom to think, wow, just by waiting, I turned this into a moment of correcting that was godly instead of a moment of tension where it was a mixed bag of help and hurt at the same time. Also, learn your spouse. This is something that she says takes time, and she knows because as she has learned me, she's learned like in this setting, bringing correction to me is going to be harder for me to receive. In this setting, it's going to be easier. Now, I want to be cautious here. My wife's giving all this great advice. It's totally on me to receive correction, and I should receive it, even if it's nagging and in the wrong context, because that's what humility and wisdom calls me to do as a husband. So I'm not saying, husbands out there, if your wife corrects you poorly, you have a excuse to cast it off, ignore it, and to just go stubbornly about your stupid ways. Like, that's not the case. I am called to respond well, whether the correction's godly or a mixed bag. I'm called to respond well, but this is just advice that she has for wives. So learn your spouse is this thing of just, it's the million things you learn in the first few years of marriage, and then you slowly add to that over the next several years. 2 years in, 3 years in, you're going to know a lot more about the way you and your spouse interact, and how breathing a certain way tends to cause certain things, how certain looks and tones of voice. Like, that was a big thing for me, is realizing I have tones of voice that impact her in ways that I had no clue when I'm talking to her. This is just good wisdom for marriage. So learn your spouse. That's just about love. It's about walking in compassionate love, and it takes time. Be patient. And she also says this. Here's a quote from Mrs. Winger. She says, "Godly doesn't mean self-righteous." So self-righteous is I'm right, I'm correct on this issue, and I'm going to correct him on it. But godly is not the same as that. Godly is a lot more than just being right on an issue. It's about the behavior you have on those things and the way you interact. And the final thing she said is to ask is, who am I doing this in front of? Who am I bringing correction in front of? So that's a huge thing. Now, there's times to bring correction in front of anybody. Your husband gives bad directions to somebody, they're going to go the wrong way. So you have to bring correction right then and there, or those people are going astray. But if possible, it should be done in private. And this is kind of a biblical principle that we could sort of parallel in other more extreme situations. Jesus in Matthew 18, he says that if someone sins against you, take them aside, just the two of you by yourselves, and bring correction. And then the idea is that correction and fixing those kinds of issues is always better if done in private when that's possible. Now, sometimes that private correction has to turn into a public thing, especially if it's a major sin issue that the husband's got. And then you take more drastic measures because it's a more drastic issue. But Proverbs also echoes this. It talks about how open rebuke, and throughout Scripture, open rebuke or rebuking people in front of a group is it's looked at as as a poor thing, as a negative thing. Not always wrong, because the prophets do it. Jesus does it, like with the Pharisees. He openly rebukes. But there is a general rule about interpersonal relationships. Pull them aside. Bring that correction privately. So anyways, those are some things that my wife shared. She probably could explain it better than I can. She's pretty good at that kind of stuff. But